Hello and welcome to The Print. I am Devdatta and we are here in Kathmandu ahead of a crucial elections in Nepal on the 5th of March. Now, in September, massive protests led by the Gen Z generation of Nepal saw the fall of the KPOL led government, and there was an interim administration in place led by the first female Chief Justice of Nepal, Sushila Karki. Now, curtains are drawing on the interim administration. The election fever is palpable in the city, and the city votes for a shift or a change in politics, as is the word on the street. We speak to writer, journalist, and the founder of Himal South Asia, Kanak Mani Dixit, who is one of the foremost voices on Nepal politics, to understand more about this and where Nepal is headed in the future. Welcome to the print, sir.
Thank you.
To begin with, I would like to understand from you, 6 months since the Gen Z led protests and an election now taking place, where is Nepal and its politics headed?
We're in a concerning moment because, on the one hand, the legacy parties are compromised. On the other hand, we have a potentially disruptive young party known as the Rashtriya Swatantra Party, the RSP, which is made up of some tested, some untested people. Possibly a lot of young candidates in parliament who can learn on the job and ultimately lead Nepal ahead. But at this particular moment, we are, I think, at a point where we might even have to consider, depending on how the new forces deliver. And we actually don't know on this day, the 4th of March, how things will work out, because it's one thing to listen to the staccato on social media and something else when people go to the vote. Still, as I said, it's a concerning moment. There's one potentially disruptive force that seems to have the momentum, and the legacy democratic parties have been compromised up to a point.
When you say a disruptive political force, I assume that you're referring to the RSP.
I do.
And the RSP, is a very newly formed political party. When I went around the streets of Kathmandu yesterday speaking to people, there was a general consensus that people are going to vote for Balendra Shah. I want to understand from you, how has he become, he's now the front runner for the prime ministerial role, but he's also an extremely polarizing figure. Apart from the word on the street, when I spoke to the Gen Z protesters, a few key protesters, the opinion about him was very divided. Of course, I realized that most of the protesters who are now contesting are contesting on an RSP ticket, but there were also people who are now part of civic platforms who called him, if I can use the term, who called him a political opportunist. They said that he was not part of the protests. He endorsed the protests on social media, and which led to a massive outrage among people, and saw people coming on streets because he had endorsed it publicly. And 6 months down the line, he has resigned from his post as mayor, is now contesting elections. Like you said, RSP, which again has another polarizing figure, Rabila Michane. I want to understand from you, this shift from old democratic parties, as you call it, to the new young parties that is coming up. How do you think this is going to play out in the larger political landscape going ahead?
Firstly, it's a phenomenon. Social media, the algorithms, the bots, the monetized websites and influencers uh, who have taken over the airwaves. Earlier, journalists, edited content is what would make opinion. Now, and it's not a phenomenon new to Nepal, it's just that we're going to elections at this particular time with everybody from the village agriculturalist to the laborer, everybody looking at the smartphone. And the smartphone aids the sense of angst and anger, so that the country is made to feel like a failed country. When, if you compare Nepal to outlying areas of South Asia, neighboring areas, it is not a failed state. It's the most open society of South Asia. It is not doing at all badly compared to neighboring regions of Uttar Pradesh, Purvanchal, Bihar, UP. But let's not even compare ourselves to the poorest parts of India. Even on a scale of Human Development Index, Nepal actually is ahead uh, most parts of South Asia, including most parts of India. However, the sense that this is all a disaster is palpable. It is part of it is real. Part of it is the fact that our politicians who led the old parties, it seemed like they were on a revolving chair and they were constantly one or the other party there. So people got tired of seeing their faces, and here comes a new face. And frankly, for me, the attraction of the RSP party and its two main leaders is that it's something new. Not that it's something good, which we have yet to see. Not that it is something uncorrupt, we have yet to see that. Not that it is something, an entity that can actually bring progress and development, we have not seen that. But it is just that this particular moment where the algorithm and our society meet at this point. There you have Mr. Balendra Shah, who's a former rapper, whose mayorship in Kathmandu, he jumped ship midway. He was elected by the people of Kathmandu for a full 5-year term. He jumped ship within 3 years. That doesn't show much fealty to one's voters to begin with. But he has made a name for himself, to answer your question more directly, by saying almost nothing, by creating an aura. He's got a fantastic social media team that keeps him away and keeps away from the public and keeps the aura alive. So while other politicians may do door-to-door canvassing, he does road shows, right? And so all of this does not mean that he might make a bad national leader or prime minister. It's just that we don't know. What I do know is that while he was mayor, for doing the most commonplace things that any mayor should do, good things, but that's the job of a mayor, little things got highlighted beyond belief. And so now that same formula may be applied in the national sphere. We'll have to see, and he may be capable of learning on the job. We all hope for that.
But again, based on what you said, the question that I then have is, Nepali politics has, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the one thing that Nepali politics has lacked is stability. No government has till date completed its entire term. There has been, like you called it, a revolving door politics. And one of the core components of the protests last year in September was structural reforms. Of course, I understand that corruption is not something you end in a day. It's a systemic process. Do you think in a hypothetical situation, once the elections are done tomorrow, and given the writing on the wall, if RSP does come into power, do you think this will bring stability first in the political arena in Nepal? And second, do you think this will lead to any kind of structural reforms, which most, the larger complaint is that the older traditional parties have not been able to bring forward?
You see, first, I think before I answer your question, we must go back to what happened in September. That will also explain why the new party, RSP, may not also be ready for the kind of debates that are required to convert all the lackings in our constitution, in our laws, in our governance system, in our bureaucracy. Because right now it's just a party that may just crash land into leadership and then have to start saying, now, how do we make this work, right? So you have to go back to September 8th, 9th. What is known as the Gen Z or Gen Z for South Asia, including Nepal, uprising, was not a Gen Z uprising. There was a Gen Z protest called for 3 hours in the morning of the 8th of September. That is the extent to which that protest was a Gen Z protest. And as the organizers themselves say and cry themselves hoarse of that particular event, they say, we did not demand fall of government. We did not demand disbandment of parliament. We did not want any kind of collapse of state institution. We wanted to speak against social media
Ban.
restrictions. They call it a ban. I call it a restriction. We can come to that if you want to. A social media ban. We wanted good governance, and we were against the corruption that is rife. Now, keep in mind, firstly, that the fact that there is corruption in Nepal is widely known. The fact that the top leadership in the main three parties are all with a hand in the till is widely known. How did we find that out? Because the media covered it, not social media. It was the media, courageous journalists who often acting alone. But this is a fact in any society. Journalists open up scams. That means our society is open. Nepal was and hopefully will remain a democracy where such scams are opened up. So that is, and that kind of continuous coverage of malgovernance had hit hard the younger generation. That's why they call that meeting. And the trigger was the fact that the KP Oli government, it was a grand coalition of the Nepali Congress Party and the UML, they decided that it was important to curtail the power of the social media platforms, mainly for, there may have been some nefarious intent, but I think not. I think the intent was, we cannot control cybercrime. We cannot control sexual harassment that is rife on Nepali social media. Because there is no office of these individual social platforms. So they put out a call, register, otherwise we will restrict your access. Viber and TikTok did, others did not. The meta companies didn't,
Right.
etc. Right? YouTube and WhatsApp and Facebook did not. What the KP Oli government misread, and it was a ham-handed way to, even if it was well-intentioned, and I believe it was a restriction of social media, they asked, just register, give us a phone number, and then we'll open you up. But then these, particularly America-based companies, US-based companies, refused to. So internet went dark, social media went dark. So who got impacted? Number one, a lot of small and medium businesses which are relying on it. Secondly, communications and news access. And lastly, Nepalis have now families from the villages to the towns all over the world, and the means of contact was social media. So it hurt deeply, and nobody was going into the niceties that it was only meant to control, because they refused. So if, to begin with, I would question who in these social media giants, how do they find that they are so sovereign vis-a-vis a country which wants to have some kind of leverage so that you can at least control cybercrime. Now, I'm alert, of course, to the fact that a government that tries to restrict social media may also have intent to restrict information and news flows. For that, we are here to fight that. So I think that is a key element that you need to know, which triggered this whole event. But then, on September 8, so there was a 8:30 to 11:30 thereabouts was when there was a protest of the Gen Z generation. Thereafter, it got hijacked by there's video evidence, there is evidence of the people who called that protest on 8 September. It got hijacked by people coming in motorbikes with loudspeakers, thousands more adding to the numbers. The police was not prepared. They were criminally negligent in how they handled the movement towards Parliament building, because the protest was called to have a peaceful protest and limited, not a march to Parliament. And then came the bullets from the Parliament building, the so-called Special Task Force. And that was a horrific situation. 19 dead in one afternoon in Nepal. It's about, nothing could be worse than that. Prime Minister KP Oli made the mistake, disastrous mistake, of not resigning on moral grounds. Nobody will or can accuse him of having pulled the trigger, but you are the Prime Minister. So many deaths under your watch. He didn't resign. So that is September 8. what we must understand is what happened in September 9, because the BBC report, various international reports, the focus and the social media focus is on September 8. And the 19 deaths, which ultimately became 21 for that day, was bad enough, horrific. Uh, but the next day, there was conflagration that was countrywide. And who did that? Why was it done? Why was the Supreme Court torched, the Parliament torched, the executive building Singh Darbar torched, and countrywide torching of Malput, land revenue offices, of tax offices, very very targeted attacks on court papers. Um, 9 lakh court papers, historically till the present, burnt to ashes.
Yeah.
So, Nepal, in my view, historically has never seen the kind of 19 dead in the modern era in one afternoon, even fighting the royal monarchist government. You never had those many deaths. So that is never before 8th November, 8th September, never before 9th September. I would say going back to the Lichavi era of the 1600s till today, 1500s till today, Nepal has never seen a day like the 9th of September in terms of the complete attempt to bring about the collapse of state, destruction of the constitution, forget the fall of the government, certainly also a fall of parliament. So this is the background that must inform us as to how do we get out of this. Most important thing is to find out find an answer to 3 questions ideally before we went into elections, but that didn't happen. Who called youngsters to come to a political rally, even asking them to wear school dresses? Number one, who was it that did that among the organizers or among the instigators? Who pushed or led the youngsters towards parliament? 2. 3, who gave the order to shoot to kill the youngsters because they were not armed? That would be from the police side. Then the next day, how come this very coordinated torching of state institutions? How come there was a geolocation of individual houses of politicians? How come the great big supermarkets were done to
Ashes.
dust? The parliament building, the state institutions, individual politicians. It was a time of fear that I haven't felt even in the Maoist era in Nepal. And of course, we tend to forget, but I would suggest that whoever tried to bring down the Nepali state, whoever, I have no clue, I can suggest that they may be monarchists, ex-Maoists, and pure anarchists brought together by the social media, possibilities of social media platforms. But I think, I am convinced it was more of a conspiracy than that there was a planned exercise. And given that I believe that it was a planned exercise to bring down the Nepali state, question is, who did it? I don't know enough. I have my suspicions. But then, are they still around? Yes. And that is why, thus far, the run-up to this election has been relatively peaceful. And I would hope whoever comes to power in Nepal, new and old parties, most likely a mix. New and old politicians, new and old parliamentarians, most likely a mix. A lot of them will be youngsters and or of the younger generation. And some of them have shown an ability to quickly learn on the job, like so many of these Gen Z protesters. Some of them became populist like everybody else. Some of them were violently oriented, but so many of the Gen Z protesters actually learned on the job, so to speak, within weeks they had learned about constitutionalism, about historical issues, about political principles and good governance and rule of law and due process. So I think a kind of mix is required in going ahead. Whoever comes to power, and a cross-generational civic society that will also make sure that this most open society of South Asia remains open. But that remaining open society is not enough. You need to have good governance, you need to have delivery, you need to have our economy to improve. That requires more than just open society. I'm sure of that.
And based on what you said, I would also like to further ask you that a lot of concerns for the common Nepali citizen right now, apart from the fact that rampant corruption is leading to a certain elite stronghold over the resources, is the lack of employment opportunities, the mass migration that is happening. I mean, if I speak to Nepalis on the street, some of them are either they have family members who are abroad, they themselves want to go abroad, and these are concerns that are core to their, I would say, the core to their psyche and the kind of governance that they want. Going ahead, of course, stability is one question, and like we discussed all of this, but going ahead, whichever government comes into power, what do you think their top three agendas of reform with reference to the Nepali economy, the Nepali society, and the common civic agenda should be?
Well, I don't think there's anything new that I would suggest to the new government as opposed to what I would have suggested to the old government. Don't be corrupt. You'll be found out. Number one, have internal democracy within your parties. You must. And then maintain proper um, international relations that um, feeds into Nepal's sense of self. Use Nepal's neutrality for economic growth. Use Nepal's geographical location for uh, better livelihoods. You see, Nepal is a country that is blessed um, in three ways. We're we're really lucky as a country, and I compare this Nepal to other countries of South Asia. Demographically, we may have a majoritarian spirit in certain echelons, like in the bureaucracy or in politics, but there is no majoritarian community in Nepal. The largest community in Nepal, the Hill Chetris, are 17%. The next one down the line is the Magar ethnic group, 13%. Then you go down the line, you have smaller and smaller groups. And those small groups also have a sense of agency. For example, the Muslims of Nepal make up about 5% of the population. But the Muslims of Nepal also don't feel like a minority as if you're actually 5% when the majority is 60 or 80. So all minorities also have a sense in this new era, especially under the new constitution of 2015, which is an inclusive constitution. It's inclusive, democratic, federal, and secular. Right? These are the things that we are trying to protect here. And these are the things that I think those who conducted the 9 September mayhem were attacking this. Right? Now, therefore, I won't have a formula of 2 or 3 or 4. There is all I can say is that these are all the things that Nepal needs. We should give, but there's one reason. Going back to your question and the earlier part of your question, when you were giving the background, one reason Nepalis feel distressed in Nepal is because unlike the larger countries of South Asia, especially India or Pakistan, there is an actual sense of connectedness with the state in Nepal. And so, like I can tell you, if I go to sleep and something wrong has happened in governance, you actually wake up with a bad taste in the mouth. But if something good has happened and it has nothing to do with you, but with the country as a whole, I believe that that sense of immediacy of good or bad doesn't happen in the larger countries of South Asia, the countries with larger populations. That is Nepal's good fortune. And so when people are distressed and they say things are not working out, that's also because public at large has in democratic Nepal, right? That's after 1990, has more expectations from the state than do citizens in many other countries and societies of South Asia. So, in that sense, yes, if things don't work out, then people get angry, they get livid, they leave or they protest. Uh, but I believe that Nepal, I didn't give you all the three reasons why Nepal is blessed. Demographically, we are blessed. I got carried away. I apologize. Demographically, we are blessed. We're blessed geographically, both in terms of what are the resources that our geography is able to generate as a country on the southern slopes of the Himalaya, from the plains to the high Himalaya, for tourism, for hydropower, for organic farming, for all kinds of resources that we can generate for better livelihoods. So that is the second plus: demography, geography. The third is history, continuous history. Nepal is the oldest nation state of South Asia, going back to the 1700s. Of course, the history should not be a hagiography of all the rulers, but Nepal has been together, except when a chunk was cut off in the Treaty of Sugoli of 19, uh, 1816
16.
with the British. Uh, if you don't count that, Nepal has been thus since then. And so there's a sense of historical continuity in Nepal, which you'll not read up in all the mm, stories about the marginalization of communities of Nepal, which is a reality. But there's also parallelly a sense of shared history. So in this situation, Nepal gives you, for the rest of South Asia, the ideal possibilities of running a nation state in the modern era as it should be: not centralized, not ruled over by an army, and not ruled over by a majoritarian thought process. But then why have we not made it work? I make it look like an ideal country. Why hasn't it worked? A, our politicians, the ones that are right now fighting for their political survival, they lost the plot. They lost the plot in terms of how did they fight the Rana regime, the autocracy in the 50s? What were the guiding lights and guiding principles of the Nepali Congress Party? What were the guiding principles of the Communist Party of Nepal, United Marxist Leninists, which is essentially a social democratic party, because they evolved a particular formula that makes them social democratic, known as Jaw Baja, Janata Ko Bahudaliya Janavad. That's their ideology. So these two parties, over time, and in trying to tackle the Maoist rebellion, in trying to tackle international interventionism, and also without the kind of social science backing that any society needs. Humanities education, humanities learning, not just STEM education. In all of this, our civil society was not able to watchdog. Our journalists, I think, by and large, were capable of doing what journalists should do. But the civil society, the intelligentsia, got weakened, and they couldn't watchdog these political parties. So the political parties became self-oriented and leadership-oriented. The internal democracy weakened, etc. So I think that's one of the main reasons that the political parties went towards mediocrity. That is why we couldn't deliver. Number one. Number two is external interventionism in Nepali affairs. That is a factor. And by external intervention, if you don't mind, I can tell you who I mean. One is
Please.
the Americans have a distant interest in Nepal, but an increasing interest that Nepal not go into the China fold, given the rise of China of the last 2 decades. So there's a earlier the U.S. interest on Nepal was benign, actually genuinely wanting to help Nepal for the sake of helping Nepal. Peace Corps volunteers, Colombo Plan, spreading of wheat farming, highways, all of that was done, and a whole ropeway that used to supply Kathmandu, all of them were done to good purpose, with good intentions, in my belief. That has changed now. So now the US looks at Nepal more as a geostrategic potential asset. So that is a factor. The Chinese, uh, the word in New Delhi always is countries like Nepal, uh, or Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka. The moment we reach out to Beijing for anything, commercial transactions, state to state visits, services, then we are accused of the China tilt. And I would just say that these countries should be left to themselves, will never tilt towards China. They will, like Nepal, will reach out to take advantage of the Chinese economy as the Indian state does. Except when Nepal or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh does it, it seems to be anti India, whereas India is enmeshed in the Chinese economy. The Indian economy is. So, the Chinese now. The Chinese themselves have looked at Nepal since the 60s as a country loosely in the Indian sphere of influence in the past. In fact, Chinese leaders like Mao and Zhou Enlai have told Nepali leaders like Kirtner Bista or BP Koirala or Tanga Prasad Acharya, you are south of the Himalaya. We will always be your friends, but you should keep good friendship with New Delhi. That was what they used to say. Not anymore in this wolf warrior era. The Chinese actually would want to influence Nepali politics, and only problem there is that they are a little imperial when they look at Nepal. They don't try and understand Nepal the way the Indians do understand Nepal, the Indian state, New Delhi functionaries. The Chinese don't. So they have tried a few times to intervene, but failed abjectly.
And what about India?
Then I come to India because that fills our horizon, right? It fills our horizon, but if we're in this room and if you talk to a political scientist, the political scientist, whether it's from India or from Nepal, will never refer to that elephant in the room, that is India. Because, and then that does complete injustice to the challenges that the Nepali state faces in what it does. And also, it gives a false sense of agency for Nepali players, which is not there, given that the Indian um, eyes are right over your shoulder looking at everything you do. So, in a sentence, Indian interventionism is rife in Nepal. It is in layers. And I should not even say Indian interventionism, I should say New Delhi interventionism. And even within New Delhi, which hand of the Indian state does what? I would question, does the other hand know what the other hand does? So, what are the elements of the Indian state that intervene or interfere in Nepali affairs? Because as I'm telling you, and of course it is my perspective, it is rife. It is happening. It is happening over decades, but it's getting more intense. It used to be that the Kathmandu-Delhi relationship in the 1960s was defined between the political leadership because they were at an equal level and equal respectful relationship. BP Koirala and Jawaharlal Nehru. They would consult, they would also argue, but they were respectful. Why? Because the first layer of Nepali Democrats fought for Indian independence with the British. BP Koirala shared uh, broke bread with the first president of India, Rajendra Prasad, in Hazaribagh jail. Why were the Nepali freedom fighters from the Ranas in Indian jails with the freedom fighters? Because they realized the, without the British leaving India, the Rana regime will never fall. And that's how as it happened. So they had this relationship, prime minister to prime minister, leadership to leadership. Then with the takeover by the king went into his palace, right? And so the relationship became Indian ambassador to Nepali state functionaries. Then, when the Maoists came above ground, they were mostly headquartered in India. and their handlers were in Indian intelligence agencies, RAW and IB. So when they came above ground in 2006 and came back to run in open politics, RAW and IB came back into Nepal, and they became very instrumental to the extent that I believe over time the role of the Indian ambassador weakened and the role of the agencies increased in Nepal. And what has happened in the last 5 to 6, 7 years is the most dangerous of all. It is the entry of Hindutva, RSS slash BJP, as essentially an arm of the Indian state to try and do in Nepal what is being done in India. So, as a result, I think it'll be a failed attempt, but there's an attempt to try to uh, copycat efforts by RSS, Hindutva efforts, and the Krud the Hanuman flags and the attempts to do raucous activities in front of mosques during times that are important to the Muslim population, etc. All of these things, they're trying to copycat. I think they won't work, but they're enough to shake up Nepali society. So, over the time, over the decades, Indian interference in Nepal is so real that you could bite it, but you will not find it in the discourse. And the point, and I say all this as somebody who has studied in New Delhi. My dearest friends are from India. I'm a South Asian, like they are. I feel Nepal is genetically programmed to be pro India and Indians, right? Without wishing ill will on any other country. But how could Nepal ever be quote unquote anti India? It could challenge Delhi. I could challenge New Delhi, but that doesn't mean I'm anti Indian, right? So, this is something that Indian analysts and the Indian bureaucracy based in New Delhi should try to understand. Leave Nepal alone to do its own politics, then there will be no problems with Nepal. If you go around blockading a neighboring country, of course there'll be problems. But otherwise, Nepal, as a much smaller country, in a worldwide scale, not a small country, but in relation to India, a smaller country and a smaller population, but an important country because it is astride the Himalaya. It is considered, we have an open border where we are also astride the population hubs of India. So while Nepal may be small, it is not an unimportant country. And if New Delhi analysts, scholars, think tankers, geostrategic wallas, whoever you call it, right? Retired bureaucrats, retired foreign secretaries, if they were only to look at Nepal from the perspective of Patna, Lucknow, right? Siliguri, it'll look different because Nepal can only rise with Eastern UP Purvanchal and Bihar. And Bihar and Eastern UP Purvanchal can only rise as Nepal rises because our economies through the open border are locked and they can do better over time. And if Nepal takes advantage of the northern passage, takes advantage of the Chinese economy, that can only benefit India or North India, as you will. So I think uh, there's a need for a little bit of give in New Delhi. Let Nepal be. It will not spin away into a pro-Chinese, bastion. It'll remain friendly with Nepal. That much self-confidence New Delhi must garner for itself.
I mean, that is self explanatory in itself, but I have one final
Of
question for
course.
you, which is on the monarchist sentiments in the country. Uh, since I have been here, I spoke to a few people, and like we discussed, for most people, it's either the RSP because Balen is a new face, or surprisingly, some people, because last time I was told that there is very little monarchist sentiment in the country, But some people did tell me that it would be good if the king was to return, because then they would bring a kind of stability that Nepal has not seen for a very long time now. We also saw the former king, give video speeches once the election dates were announced, saying that this is not the right time to hold elections. One of the Gen Z protesters told me something which stayed with me. She pointed out how RSP's Balendra Shah dresses up in a very similar manner to the king. Adding up all of these narratives as a whole, I would like to understand from you, is there a lingering monarchist sentiment in Nepal where a certain population wants the return of the king and to go back to that era, or is democracy still holding strong in the country?
I think democracy is holding strong, but like with all the social media popularizing of new parties and new forces, so does social media also highlight, especially among people that believe that the past was rosy and the present is terrible. And I would like to, you understand my position. The past was not rosy. The present is much more rosier than what we give it credit for. Firstly, remember the reason Nepal became a republic was ex-king Gyanendra himself. He conducted a coup, tried to take over, and then and ran a autocratic government. We all protested and went to jail. It was our privilege to fight him. And if the royal palace were to return to any kind of constitutional role, it would play the same game again, because this ex-king has never apologized for what he did. His autocratic tendencies are laid bare. And so it was because of his autocratic tendency that the parties decided, the democratic parties decided, now we can't. We lived long enough with his father and his brother, Mahendra and Birendra, and now this guy it looks even more autocratic, so we must let go of the monarchy. At that time, they did approach Gyanendra, in particular Girija Koirala. You don't become king, let your grandchild become a king. Or why don't you just become a cultural entity? He said, nothing doing, I want to be king. And that is when the democratic forces decided, okay, be gone with it. Let us give the Maoists their pound of flesh to claim that they have succeeded and say, we are now a republic. So Gyanendra is the main person responsible for the end of a historical kingship in Nepal, number one. I myself was not for an end of the constitutional monarchy before the constitution was written. But once Nepal has become a republic, that is my constitution. I own it. And I also know that if the kingship were to return, it'll be much worse as a constitutional monarchy than it was before, meaning it would become autocratic and it would try to take over. So that would weaken Nepal's path to progress much more than this cantankerous democracy that we have. So there's no question that we should not go back to monarchy. The monarchists also have a residual support among a lot of older generation.
A sense of nostalgia.
Because nostalgia, it's there, and some of them would have benefited from that nostalgia. In the villages, that person or his father may have been a Pradhan Pancha of that village. Or in the hierarchy, the people in the army were certainly beholden to the monarchy because that was their ideology, right? So in that sense, there are categories in Nepal. But does it seep across the landscape? No. And the best way to check how well the monarchists do is to look at the Royalist Party or the Monarchist Party, known as the Rashtriya Prajatantra Party, RAPRA. It doesn't do well. It does well when it collaborates and has a Gathbandhan with one of the other parties, but in itself, it doesn't have a great following. If you look at a number of people in a gathering, if the ex-king were to announce, I'm arriving in Kathmandu from Viratnagar, it's not even an international. There are enough people in Kathmandu now. either waiting for their ticket to go overseas, waiting for labor certification, waiting for their passport. There are floating individuals who will turn up, and it'll look like a big gathering. But the kingship also, with the dislocations brought about by in September 8 9, there may be some people who think that, oh, the older days were so much more secure and peaceful. But remember one thing, uh, democracy is always contested. And that contestation in democracy cannot be seen as a weakness. It strengthens us. It's not like the peace of the Masanghat. It's not like the peace of the graveyard. We need a rambunctious peace where there is contestation. That will only happen in the Republic of Nepal, where the historical kingship will not remain a kingship, but I'm all for giving a dignified place for the people who are the direct descendants of Nepal's founding king. I have no problem with that. But the moment there is any fear that such an individual, now or later, will start taking advantage of politics, uh, that can't be allowed. And the last thing, because we talked about the army, it's also the army of Nepal also bears watching. It tends to be very, very, very angry when people critique it. But the army did have a role in either, some would say, finding a release in those very tense days of 9 September, in trying to form the formation of the new interim government of Sushila Karki. But that's one point of view, that the army came and saved the situation. The other situation was, the other reading is that the army was manipulative, and it chose who it wanted to be the prime minister and fed that idea to the Gen Z, and that the army, at least sections in the army, may have been all for bringing back the king, but that did not happen. And so I give credit to the president, Mr. Ramchandra Paudel, for finding a via media where we went a little bit out of the constitution, because constitution demands that a member of parliament be prime minister through majority vote, but that didn't happen. That is the extent to which we have gone outside the constitution, and the elections of 5 March are meant to take us back to the rails of the constitution. And after that, when we start this journey again on the rails, constitutional rails, I think we need to ensure that we save our pluralism and democracy, our inclusion, our federalism, while adjusting to make it more efficient, the provinces, and secularism. We have to be on guard, because there are too many forces about trying to destabilize us as a society.
And one final question, coming back to India, you were also talking about accountability and, the KP Oli is again contesting from his home turf. As far as I know, if I'm not wrong, he has not yet taken any kind of accountability for what happened on the streets on September 9th. If I don't see a complete majority being won by any of these parties, whichever party comes to power, if it is the RSP or it is Balen Shah, RSP, the Prime Ministerial face, or any other party, say the Nepali Congress or KP Oli's UML, what would their foreign policy towards India specifically look like going ahead? Do you see any contradictions happening? Do you see a smooth ride?
Firstly, you mentioned Gagan Thapa, a name that we haven't talked about yet.
Yes.
Right? Let me tell you, in the cast of characters, who knows who's going to win, right? Because just because social media says so and so will win, or the Western media says so, doesn't mean that person will win. So that's an open question, and I will not be biased in any way in pointing out who it will be. But I can offer you my bias in this terrain of various leaders. Who would I personally want to see as prime minister, with them having won in their constituency and their parties haven't done well, is Gagan Thapa.
The Nepali Congress
Yes.
candidate.
That's because one doesn't have to be a Nepali Congress supporter. as I am not. I am independent, but I believe that he is somebody who's got both the legacy of democratic governance as well as great study of Nepali society and economy. But
He is also, if I'm not wrong, among all these three parties, it's the only party which has also done a lot of internal reforms.
it has, because he, after the protests of September, and when there was a need for new blood, he actually took it on to challenge the old guard in his party and came out on front in the front. So I can answer your question by referring back to what I have written and tweeted vis-a-vis Gagan Thapa, that he is my choice for Prime Minister. One. Number two, but I would hope, among all the other good things that I know of him, but I would hope that he remains alert to Nepal's national sense of agency and not to be swayed by interventionism by any quarter, by which, of course, I meant
Three quarters.
firstly the US, secondly Chinese, but most importantly New Delhi. And so, what would I suggest to them vis-a-vis New Delhi? Number one, this they would do anyway. Do not do anything that will be inimical to Indian interests. But that is not even, doesn't even require saying. Nepal wouldn't do anything inimical to Chinese interests either. We're a neutral country, we should be allowed to be neutral. So what I would suggest to them is, if there's any country that would want us to side with them, use all your acumen and diplomatic prowess to tell that country, i.e. New Delhi, let us be, we are your friends for kingdom come. So this is what I would suggest to them, that not to ensure that there is no sense of insecurity in India emanating from Nepal. Beyond that, if to convince the Indian government that if Nepal's economy grows, it can only benefit India. And the best way to improve Nepal's economy is through good governance internally and to keep away interventionism from neighbors. Then Nepal's economy will grow. So, if you want to look at Nepal doing well and having economic growth, that is good for India as well. This is what I would ask our leaders to try to convince their New Delhi counterparts.
On that note, thank you so much, sir. This has been an extremely insightful conversation.